Alright, what you're going to do is just cut out the main piece to your animal, and then you're going to be cutting out whatever your background pieces are. So this is what my project looks like right now. All these scrap pieces that I cut away from my original rectangle piece are going to go inside this gray Tupperware at your table. This is your trash can, so that you don't need to get up and walk to a trash can at the back of the room. Okay, then you're going to get a second piece of cardboard. This is going to be the base to your printing plate, and you need to take your tracing paper and you need to copy that drawing a second time on this piece. If it doesn't print, you need to turn your tracing paper over, put more pencil on that side, and then print it again. So I've got my print finished, and now I've got these pieces that I can now start arranging on my background piece. So this is what my background was going to look like, where I just had these paint splatters that were surrounding the edge of my Boston Terrier. Okay, so this piece, I need to be cutting this into puzzle pieces. So this stuff, I'm just going to set that off to the side for now. Alright, this one. These lines that I drew on the inside that I divided my dog into sections, I'm going to need to cut those away. So remember, when you cut, make sure your fingers are away from the blade. Turn the paper so that, okay, now this might happen to you. See how I'm cutting? I just bent my cardboard piece. I'm going to try and hold that still, or use scissors to finish cutting. If this rips off, no big deal. It's already torn partially because I'm gluing this to the background of my collagraph, so it's okay. It's going to get glued down anyways. Alright, so now that I've got these two pieces separated, I'm going to probably forget where things are located. So what I could do is label these pieces before they get misplaced. Back leg, front leg, front leg. So label something that makes sense to you. This is back, chest, front leg, front leg. So that I remember how to fit this piece back together like a puzzle. And it might be best to start gluing these pieces down as soon as you cut them so that they don't get lost. But the tricky thing about gluing, you can see it better on this board. When you glue your pieces down, you have to have gaps between the pieces. The gaps between the pieces, right here and right here, is what's going to create an interesting collagraph print. So, okay, these project examples. If you notice, this piece of the background has a gap between the body of the fish and the background piece. This has a gap between the body of the fish and the background piece. These fins were cut into individual pieces, and there's a gap in between. The gap in between shows the background paper. This example, these vines or lines in between the wings have a space that shows my background paper. My body parts to my dragonfly shows a space because that shows my background paper. You want to make sure that when you build your plates, like these two examples, you have gaps between those puzzle pieces. You don't want those shapes to touch right up next to one another. You want to glue them far enough away that you've got that gap in between. So you have to consider that before you start gluing it onto your background space. Alright, so this is a front leg and a back leg. Now, what I'm going to want to do is separate those pieces so that the line I drew is right in between, and give it a little bit of a space. You're going to go outside the edge of the contour line you drew, and that is okay, not a big deal. So now I'm going to use my glue bottle. You have to make sure you're putting glue on the right side. Your elementary teachers might have used the saying, dot, dot, not a lot. or just squeeze a skinny line. That is all the more glue that I need. I'm going to turn that over. I'm going to separate it so that I have a space between those two sections. And then this one is going to get glued right here. So I'm going to get a little bit of glue, line that up, give myself a gap between my pieces. Okay, so it might be easier to glue these down before you lose them as you start to cut things out. So now I'm going to cut away this piece, and I'm going to glue it down. And then I don't want these to touch. I have to leave a little bit of a space. So there's a gap. I'm going to cut apart the rest of my front leg. So the paw got cut off. This one gets cut off. And then these are going to get glued down. Okay, I'm going to glue the long piece to the leg first, so that I then know how far apart to glue the paw. So I'm going to space that. So you can see that now my drawing disappeared. That's because my leg got glued over the top. No big deal. Those lines were just guides to help you know where to start gluing. But what's important is that you have a gap or space between each. Okay, as you glue, this might happen. If the cardboard starts lifting up, put another bit of glue underneath, and then squish that down flat, because you want that to be completely flat on the board. So now I'm going to separate the back piece. You notice I turn my cardboard so that I'm cutting away from my fingers. And now this piece is going to get glued on. I'm going to give myself a gap between both pieces. And I'm going to set that on, making sure there's a space between them. I'm going to cut out my chest of my Boston Terrier. Turn that over. Squirt a little bit of glue. Move it so I have a space on all sides. Gap here, gap here. Okay, so the head to mine is going to get tricky. So these are my ears, because I've got all these different sections of the face of my Boston Terrier. So what I can do is possibly, like if it's too hard to make those separations, I could potentially just cut away a piece entirely and not use it and just make that the whole of where the paper is showing through. So I'm going to finish cutting out this side. And when I'm cutting, I'm pushing pretty hard to get all the way through in one time. Remember, you might have to do more than one cut. Always cut away from those fingers. Okay. So this is kind of what this piece is going to look like right here. Then this ear would go here, and this ear would go here. So, then I would need to work on separating my jowls or the mouthpiece. I could remove some details if I want. Like if I don't want to print the nose, I could maybe not draw the nose. If I don't want to print the eyes, I could leave the eyes as is and then just draw those details on my final print, which might be easier. So I think that is, I don't know, maybe I'm just going to cut around these pieces right here. And if you need help cutting something, ask me. I will gladly cut anything for you. Alright, so this is why you might wait to glue things down, because you have to have all your pieces cut out to know how far to separate them before you glue them down. Because this one has to have a gap between them. Okay, now that one isn't going to give me a gap because those pieces match up exactly like a puzzle on 3 sides. So this one I'm going to have to cut slightly smaller, and at this point it's going to be really hard for me to do this with an X-Acto knife. I'm going to switch to scissors, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut a little bit off of the right side and the left side. So now this will create that space around it, and it looks like I need to cut a little bit more on this edge so that I have a gap in between. Okay, now I know how to proceed to finish gluing the rest of this. So I'm going to start with this little mouthpiece. And glue this down. Then I'm going to glue this piece. Glue that down. Okay, making sure that each piece has a little bit of a gap around it. I ignored my nose and eye. I'm going to be drawing those details on top of the print once I get it printed. And I'm just going to finish by gluing my ears. Alright. Then I'm going to press down one more time to make sure everything is glued down tight. And then I'm now going to glue down my background designs around the edge. And then my collagraph is going to be finished. So I'm going to glue those pieces in place, and then I'm ready to move on to the next step.